2, 1, go.
Good morning, comrades, and good morning, Revolution. We're here with Joe and Eric from Indiana joined us this morning. Anita's here. Welcome. We got a number of things to talk about today. I'm moderating, I guess. So the first topic on the list is the horrific shooting of Jayland Walker, a young black man in Akron, Ohio. Anita, what's the reaction there? How have the protests been developing?
It's really, people are outraged about the behavior of the Akron Police Department. Apparently, this Akron Police Department is one of those kind of small city departments that have really embraced the militarization of police equipment. They have a tank. They all came out in their anti-riot gear. I mean, this is just a horrific killing. And the police seem to be just doubling down in their blame, claims to blamelessness. I mean, they're saying they felt they were threatened by a person who was running away from 12 police officers. It's just horrific. And the protests are ongoing. People have been arrested. This morning in the middle of the night, they came and arrested someone from the Freedom Bloc, which is one of those organizations that's organizing demonstrations, and they arrested him, I understand from Twitter, that for just inciting a riot. But of course, he was nowhere near anything but his own headquarters. So it's a serious situation right now.
Eric, so what have we, over the last few years, since the massive uprising in the wake of George Floyd's murder, what have we seen in terms of responses from state and federal governments to addressing the crisis of murder by police?
Well, I think as the Akron example shows, there is a lack of sensitivity, to say the least, at the state and local level to what's going on here. The fact that it was 40 seconds, literally, if you're looking at the video of what happened to Jayland Walker, it was 40 seconds from the police car pulled up to the time that he was laying on the ground dead. And he was running away the whole time. So you look at the video and you see a bunch of armed men running at you screaming.
Looks like we lost Eric for a second there. But yeah, the video, the body cam footage is horrifying. And when I watched it, I could barely see.
It's not an unnatural desire to flee, and this happens. It's a pattern that happens over and over again, and they haven't changed training. They haven't. Well, they've been going around at the edges of how do you address this problem, when I think that the fundamental issue is around community control of the police and making the police responsible to the communities that they are there to supposedly serve and protect, but are not doing that, and making them see the people that they're supposed to be servicing or protecting as human beings, not as animals to be run down and killed.
Thank you, Eric. Joe, has the national the NAARPR has it been continuing its activity in the wake of this latest murder?
I believe the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which is the organization that led the movement to free Angela Davis, was refounded a few years ago in Chicago, now led by Frank Chapman, who is its executive director, has issued a call to action demanding that people come out and protest this thing. Eric is a member of its executive board and has been participating in that process. It seems to me that the problem is that police departments all across the country have no rights that, with respect to African American or Latino person, that they're bound to respect. They just don't care. This is the second time in the last few years that a young black man was shot running away from the police. You remember that one that was down south? Or was that North Carolina or South Carolina? Running away on video, shot dead, you know?
Laquan McDonald in Chicago running away.
And 60 shots, 60? I mean, how many bullets does it take to kill somebody, you know? And when the execution style death sentence, who had the right to try, convict, and execute that brother, you know? No, the problem is that the police departments, as Eric said, are fundamentally corrupt. They are fundamentally defending private property. They're fundamentally anti-black, anti-Latino, anti, and there needs to be radical reforms. And until that happens, these kinds of horrific murders are going to continue.
Well,
Scott?
and absolutely. The white supremacy is at this point sort of baked into them, and it's going to take more than tinkering around the edges, as Eric said, to deal with it. On a somewhat brighter note, so word came out a few days ago that the murderer of Tamir Rice, the police officer Timothy Lohman, had been hired in Tioga, Pennsylvania, just down the road from me, about an hour away. And as soon as that news came out, there was a protest in the little town of Tioga, which is in a profoundly conservative area of Pennsylvania. But there was a protest, and the mayor of the town, who is not involved in the hiring of this officer, came out and said, you know, I didn't have a hand in the hiring, but I'm not going to schedule him for any shifts. And Lohman has since resigned. So even a quick pushback, which I think was unexpected. I don't think they realized how many people around here would be horrified by that, but that it was gratifying at least to see that there was a pushback and that it was successful. But the fight continues.
Well, that's a salute to Cuyahoga, Pennsylvania. Salute to the mayor.
And there's a group
killer
around here
don't
that does
deserve
great
a job
work.
anywhere. Drive them to the moon. Let them apply for a job on the moon.
Well, I don't even think he could
On
get a job
Mars.
there if they actually looked at his resume.
Actually,
So-
Scott, the people who hired him actually did know a lot about him. The people, Hazlitt was one of them, the city council
yeah.
member who, it turns out he had tweeted stuff back when Tamir was killed, that was in favor of this police officer. Maybe they were friends from back then. But I think that and the situation in the Akron police really show how sometimes small towns around very conservative areas are getting infiltrated by white supremacists who are in now they're city council members in small towns. They're on police forces. They're really gaining positions of power.
Absolutely, and I suspect that there are districts, areas where there's an attempt to recruit exactly the kind of cop that Lohman is. as some sort of, vicious and pathetic symbol of resistance to the woke mob or whatever nonsense the right calls it these days. But it is terrifying. And we also saw over the 4th of July weekend a mass shooting in Highland Park. That was the most visibly covered one. There was also another in the Chicago area. So what, is there a link between this culture of police murder and impunity and the broader problem of gun violence and this epidemic of mass shootings, Joe?
That's a good question, Scott, and I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. I know that there is a culture of violence in this country that is consciously promoted and pushed by the powers that be. I know that the number of police killings since the murder of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd have not decreased, they've increased. The number of, the epidemic, I should say, of mass shootings around the country by these right-wing, fascist-minded individuals. By the way, I was told yesterday that Hyde Park is a 50% Jewish population, So whether or not anti-Semitism played a role in the mind of this demented, sick young man, and he is demented and sick, whether or not that played a role, we don't know. But whether it's a causal factor or whether it's coincidence, we do know that in the wake of January the 6th, these attacks have increased. And that unless there's a conscious program to end the violence and to address the underlying causes, and a program that includes isolating the right, program that includes sensible background checks and other measures of dealing with the proliferation of arms, unless there are measures to deal with the underlying social and economic causes, this stuff is going to continue. And I said at a meeting of the National Committee recently, either America deals with the epidemic of gun violence, or the epidemic of gun violence may well be the end of America. We're reaching that point. It's a crisis and it has to be dealt with.
And you mentioned in speaking about the police, this connection to private property. Eric, could you sort of draw out this relation that we're seeing on the right between sort of the defense of private property, white supremacy, and gun violence? How do those things? How do they relate to each other? What's the logic there, I guess I'm asking. Eric, we can't hear you. Are you muted, comrade?
Hi, sorry about that. So I think that's a really good question. Thank you. And I think in order to address it, you have to really think about where does America come from? What are the roots of the American experience, especially for Black people? And what is the roots of the police departments? The police departments in the United States arise from originally slave hunters, and from a time when human beings were viewed as property, when the very human dignity of their existence was rejected, and that struggle around whether people are property to be exploited or whether people should be viewed as with the dignity and respect that we all deserve, especially working people. And I view enslaved people as working people. We still have slavery in this country in the guise of the prison system. And California just refused to pass an amendment that would have ended that presumption of enslavement for people who are incarcerated. So there's a long history of the rejection of respect for humanity and respect particularly for Black people. And we see that playing out today, as I think Anita mentioned. There's a lot of KKK and other white supremacist organizations that have members that are throughout the police forces in this country, and the struggle of Black people, Latino folks, Latinas, and others to win necessary reforms brings them right up against this heavily militarized police forces across the United States. And that militarization of the police forces is reflected also in the thinking of the supremacist organizations, the white supremacist organizations that are trying to protect what they view as their, I don't know what they view it as, honestly. I actually don't know the exact ideology, the exact way that they justify that these killings, both by the police, but also by white nationalists, killings of people who are in protest and things like that. So I think that it's a constant response to the constant uprisings of Black and Latino and other oppressed peoples, women, LGBTQ plus community. Everybody, there's a huge uprising in the United States today that is touching all parts of our society. It touches on women's health and the abortion issue. It touches on peace. It touches on all these issues, but it comes down to, do we have the right to be treated as with the dignity and respect as human beings under capitalism? And do people who object to our existence here have the right to arm themselves and use those arms to project a terroristic force that is against that reform struggle? So that's how I see it, and it is consistent through the whole of my life, and pretty much if you look at the history of the United States, going back to the slave revolts that took place in the before the 1860s, or up until the Civil War, the Civil War, you'll see it's just been always an uprising and a response, and I think we're still seeing that today.
Thank you. And yeah, that knowing the history of that, I think is incredibly important. And it seems like there's something close to the core of this white supremacist ideology that has to do with the right to use property of one kind or another to enforce domination over other people as well. So the idea of the politics of the plantation master, right, who was allowed to use whatever cruelties he deemed fit to enforce his will, and well, I guess capitalist economists would call it discipline his labor force. still a term we get. So I wonder if there's some part of that there as well, and stretching even as you brought out into this question of reproductive freedom and reproductive rights, where it looks like the fight back is developing. Anita, what's going on in
Well,
struggle?
thanks. Yesterday in the Columbus Dispatch, there was a full-page ad from 1,000 or more, actually, Ohio doctors who are protesting the Dobbs decision and protesting the removal of the rights of their patients to the health care that they deserve. So I also see there was a letter signed by, I think, 80 some district attorneys saying that they would not enforce laws against abortion in their respective districts. One of whom was the city attorney for the city of Columbus and a Cuyahoga County district attorney. Unfortunately, the district attorney in Franklin County, the larger structure in Ohio, has not yet signed on to that. But I think that's one route. They're pressuring Joe Biden and the federal government to make abortion available on federal land, which they could do. The White House could take care of that with an executive order. So I think there's these small and immediate steps to take care of people's immediate needs, because there are immediate needs. There was a case that raised a lot of concern in Ohio, a 10-year-old girl, pregnant, 6 weeks plus 2 days, with a baby. Well, of course, it was a sexual assault that had formed this baby on this pregnancy, and the child had to go to Indiana to get abortion care that she needed. To force a 10-year-old girl to carry to term a pregnancy caused by a sexual assault, it's just outrageous. And people are going to have these stories.
Yeah, and so my wife is a physician who does a lot of obstetrics and reproductive health work, and some of the cases she's told me about, in the case of an ectopic pregnancy where a fertilized egg implants not in the uterus, but in, for example, in a fallopian tube. That's extremely dangerous for a woman, or for a pregnant person, and the procedure used to deal with it is an abortion. It's an embryo that's been implanted or whatever, and it has to be removed. And these bills, these laws make it impossible to perform that procedure unless there's some immediate dire risk to the mother. So doctors are having to wait. Instead of doing it as soon as they catch it, they have to wait until the mother's life is actually in danger. Or other situations where a pregnancy is going badly and there's a risk of the mother becoming septic and losing her life. These are horrific decisions that doctors are being forced into by this backward, vicious law. I guess what I don't get about it is how does it serve the purposes of the ruling class is the question I keep coming back to. Eric, do you have something on that?
Yeah, so this is really obviously a fascinating discussion, but we're talking about two things that might seem disconnected, but they're, in my mind, very connected. If you look at the police violence that we were talking about, such as Highland Park and Akron, and just the whole history of police violence, we're shooting children down. On the abortion side, we're fighting for tissue that has no life. It's not born. So it really shows the contradictions inside of capitalism, where we're using the abortion issue, or not we, but the abortion issue is being used to cynically protect to cynically help to organize the ultra-right around a false issue. And while the ultra-right is fighting for the protection of life for non-existent humans, they're also supporting the attacks, both by the police and by others, on Black and other oppressed peoples. So the absolute cynicism of that is horrific and needs to be addressed. I did want to say, well, I'll stop there. Thank you.
And Joe, we talked a little bit, I think it was last week or the week before, about what the electoral response is going to be to this. How is it going to play in the midterms? And some encouraging news has come out. The polls have shifted. The generic congressional poll has shifted in favor of the Democrats significantly, including close by me in Pennsylvania, where the Democrat John Fetterman is favored to win the Senate seat, it looks like. So what's driving that, and what role is response to both to the killing in Akron and the attack on reproductive freedom going to have? Looks like you're muted, Joe.
These are wedge issues. These are wedge issues are defined as issues that monopoly capital uses to divide the working class. And it goes all the way back to the time of slavery. It goes back to the time that they tried to use black and brown labor to break strikes. You know, it goes all fast forward to the issue of LGBTQ rights, the abortion. They're cynically, as Eric pointed out, using these issues in order to gain electoral advantage and economic profit advantage, and because the profit bottom line is always the issue. But it's boomerang. It's boomerang. You know, they starting with first the January 6 hearings, and then the Roe v. Wade decision. It's boomeranged, and it's had the effect of alerting people to the real danger posed by the return of these forces, because this Supreme Court, talk about an activist court. Oh my God, trying to take us all the way back to 1850. I was going to say 1950, but we want all the way back to 1850. And so there is now a kind of a statistical tie, 2% in the congressional elections. But it's still too early to say what's going to happen. A lot can happen between now and November. But if you want to defend abortion rights, and the Democrats correctly criticized not dealing with this issue legislatively, and Biden has been correctly criticized for not being forthright enough on the issue of abortion rights, just like he wasn't forthright enough on the issue of voting rights. The the forces of democracy are going to have to stand up and organize and mobilize, register people to vote, and so that you can have both a big D and a small d Democratic majority in the House and the Senate, and pro-working class and pro-women and pro-black, pro-Latino, pro-Asian, pro-environment, pro-LGBTQ candidates have to be elected so that these blue dogs don't get into office. Because that's the problem now. You got two blue dogs, one in West Virginia. You probably got one on the abortion right issue, one in West Virginia, the other in Arizona, who are siding with the Republicans. They need to go. And real people, well, I guess they are real people.
Even conservative Democrats are real people.
Unless they got body snatched by, a Republican. I don't want to get into no conspiracy theories like Trump and them do. Just an Italian satellite, they got some kind of chip in their brain, and satellite sent instructions to them. But you have to have real Democrats elected and a veto, not a veto-proof majority, but a right-wing-proof majority. Right-wing majorities need to be elected. That's what we need. And that's the only guarantee. That means we got to vote.
March to the polls. And I think, Joe, you have the last word. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we will see you next week.